Tonight, you will hear from 6 candidates seeking to succeed Molly Gray as Vermont's Lieutenant Governor, 4 Democrats and 2 Republicans. We'll hear from the Democratic candidates first this evening, and then we'll turn the stage over to the Republicans. In the coming weeks, we'll host 2 more debates ahead of the August 9th primary election. On Tuesday, June 28th, we'll welcome candidates for the U.S. House to the Double E Performance Center in Essex Junction. And on Wednesday, July 13th, we'll hear from candidates for Attorney General in an online-only debate. We've also got a full slate of general election debates coming up in September and October for the U.S. Senate, U.S. House, Governor, Lieutenant Governor, and probably more. For more information and to reserve tickets, you can visit VTDigger.org. Now a word from the sponsor of this event. The 13,000 members of Vermont NEA are proud to sponsor tonight's debate because they know the impact public policy has in our state's classrooms. They encourage all Vermonters to learn about the candidates and then go out and vote. This debate is also made possible by you. VTDigger is a nonprofit news organization powered by our contributing members. To help support the journalism we do and the debates that we host, please visit vtdigger.org/donate. We're here in person tonight thanks to our hosts at the Paramount Theater, including Eric Mallett, Tom O'Brien, and David Lane. Thank you so much for having us here tonight. And for those, yes, round of applause for And for those of you who are watching from home, thanks for tuning in. Our live stream tonight is made possible by our friends at PEG TV. Round of applause for them as well. Thank you. Closed captions are available by clicking the CC button on your video player. These captions are automatically generated and may contain some errors. Before I introduce the candidates and the moderators, I would like to briefly outline the format and the rules of this debate. Candidates will have the opportunity to deliver brief opening remarks before facing questions from our moderators. Candidates will generally have 90 seconds to respond. The moderators may pose brief follow-up questions or allow another candidate to respond if named. For each group of candidates, we will turn over the questioning to the candidates themselves. Each will have the opportunity to pose a question to an opponent of their choosing. Finally, we expect to end each half of the program with a lightning round, during which the candidates will answer questions in just a few words. I now have the pleasure of introducing our candidates and our moderators. Joining us on stage for the first half of tonight's program are 4 Democratic candidates for Lieutenant Governor. Representative Charlie Kimball has served in the Vermont House since 2017. He previously served as the trustee of the Village of Woodstock and chaired the Woodstock Economic Development Commission. Patricia Preston is the president and CEO of the Vermont Council on World Affairs, and she lives in Burlington. Katie Toll served in the Vermont House from 2009 to 2020, including 2 terms as chair of the House Appropriations Committee. She lives in Danville. And David Zuckerman served as lieutenant governor from 2017 to 2020, and previously served in the Vermont Senate and the Vermont House. He lives in Heinsberg. After we hear from the Democratic candidates, we will introduce the Republican candidates, Senator Joe Benning and Gregory Thayer. Finally, I'd like to introduce our moderators for the evening, VTDigger reporter Riley Robinson and senior editor Mike Dougherty. Riley and Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Paul. So, thank you all. We'll begin this evening with opening statements from the candidates. While introducing yourselves to voters, please tell us what experience you have that prepares you to serve as Vermont's next Lieutenant Governor. You will each have 90 seconds. Representative Kimball, please go ahead.
Well, thank you. First, let me say thank you to Vermont Digger and NEA for sponsoring this debate. It's great to be in Rutland. I was here yesterday, but always good to be back. So I've had a varied experience across the state of Vermont. I grew up in St. Albans and then moved to Woodstock when I was a freshman in high school. Worked in the private sector for 35 years in a variety of capacities, working for businesses large and small, both as an employee and an employer. So I've helped people buy their first car and their first home to start and expand their own business, representing artists across the world so they can make a living from their work. And I've helped manufacturers thrive through software that they use. So I've served in the House for 6 years on the Commerce and Economic Development Commission. That's why I've decided to run for Lieutenant Governor. My experience in looking at workforce development and economic development is something that's been consistent in my time. Really looking at workforce development first and hoping that we can bring meaningful careers to anyone who is willing in the state of Vermont. And also so that families find Vermont affordable for everyone. so they don't have to struggle to pay for their housing or pay for their child care or to put gas in the tank. And then they can put food on the table and cash in the bank. Sorry for the rhyme. And then also that we're looking at Vermont as being the utmost quality of life, so that we have clean air and clean water and access to the outdoors. And that our smallest towns can thrive. And that we not only feel safe, but we are safe. And I'm asking for your support as Lieutenant Governor. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we'll have Ms. Preston.
Wonderful. Thank you, Riley, Mike, VTDigger, and to all of you here in person this evening and to folks joining us virtually. As mentioned, my name is Patricia Preston, and I'm running for Lieutenant Governor because I believe in the promise of Vermont. I grew up on a 4th-generation dairy farm where I was instilled with deep values and appreciation for our land, communities, and hard work. I'm a product of our public school systems. I attended the same Little Red Schoolhouse as my grandfather and father before me. I also know the uncertainty that many Vermonters face, rising prices from gas to housing to economic uncertainty. Women's reproductive rights are on the line, and climate change is an existential burden that threatens future generations. Vermont it's at a critical turning point. And we need leadership at Montpelier that understands how to address these issues and ensures future generations can thrive. As president of a statewide organization that has been working on consensus building for nearly a decade, I'm in a unique position to deliver results for everyone. We can build a future that protects our quality of life with stable costs and affordable housing, where women have equal rights and Vermont is at the forefront of climate action. On day one, as Lieutenant Governor, I will bring new energy to Montpelier. Now is the time for a fresh era of leadership that will deliver results and live up to the promise of Vermont. I invite you to join me.
Thank you. Next we'll have Mr. Zuckerman.
Well, thank you, Riley and Mike, VTDigger, and Vermont NEA for hosting this event, and the Paramount Theater for hosting us today. I am David Zuckerman, and I'm running for Lieutenant Governor, and I'm asking for your vote. I came to Vermont to go to UVM and I set my roots. I started a small business over 20 years ago. It's a farm. I understand the struggles a lot of small businesses are facing, struggling to find enough help on the farm, and also struggling with the increased costs that we're facing on the business side, just as Vermonters are with their fuel bills, housing costs, rent, and so forth. I served in the legislature for 18 years, including 4 of them in the House as Chair of Agriculture, on the Ways and Means Committee in the House as well, and on the Natural Resources and Energy Committee, and in the Senate for 4 years as Vice Chair of Agriculture and also on the Education Committee. During that time, I introduced and helped lead and collaborate on many major issues that we're all proud of in Vermont. Marriage equality, raising minimum wage, affordable housing, cannabis reform, renewable energy legislation, medical aid and dying, universal health care, and so much more. We have major issues in front of us today, and I want to serve as your Lieutenant Governor with the experience that I have of passing major legislation in the past to improve people's lives. With me as your Lieutenant Governor, you'll have that experience on day one at the gavel of the Lieutenant Governor's office, not only leading on issues, but also presiding over a Senate, knowing the rules and the process. Excuse me, thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll have Ms. Hall.
Thank you. It's nice to see all of you here this evening. And I'd like to thank the hosts and the sponsors, our moderators, and the people of Rutland for letting us be in this beautiful theater tonight. I am Kitty Toll. I am from the Northeast Kingdom, and I grew up on a dairy farm in Danville. I am the youngest of 14 children, and I had the opportunity to use Vermont's education system, from our public school system to the state colleges, and receiving a graduate degree out of UVM. From there, I became a middle school teacher, and I taught middle school for 14 years. And I can honestly say, teaching middle school prepares you for anything in life. If you can relate to 14-year-olds, you've got something going. And I have to say, I learned as much from them as I'm sure that they learned from me. I have 2 daughters that were born and raised in Danville. And when my youngest daughter was 7 years old, I ran for the legislature and served 12 years. In the legislature, I was first on the Agriculture Committee, and then I moved to the Appropriations Committee, where I served as chair for 4 years. It was at this time that I brought consensus building to the committee and passed budgets out on unanimous votes. I also ushered through the Global Warming Solutions Act and a carbon study, and it's these experiences and this purpose that I would like to bring to the office of Lieutenant Governor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. We'll now move on to questions for each of you. Some of these come from VTDigger readers. You will each have 90 seconds to answer, and we reserve the right to ask follow-up questions, which should be answered in no more than 30 seconds. Our first question tonight. The Lieutenant Governor has certain responsibilities in the State Senate and is in the line of succession to the Governor, but on a day-to-day basis, the role is largely ceremonial. Why are you seeking an office with little material power, and how would you use that office to actually serve Vermonters? Ms. Toll, we'll start with you.
Thank you for the question. When I decided to run for the office of Lieutenant Governor, what was the most cause was knowing that this person could become governor, as what we saw with Howard Dean when Governor Snelling unfortunately passed away. And it was that conversation that I had with myself to ensure that I was ready to do that job. I know the job of Lieutenant Governor, presiding over the Senate, serving on the committee on committees, and serving constituents and being a loud, strong voice for Vermonters. But I had to assure myself that I could ascend to that next role if needed. And I believe my time as a budget writer, chairing the House Appropriations Committee, has given me experience and knowledge of all of state government. I understand how the money works in Vermont. I understand how federal dollars work, how the matching works, and I also understand how the money matches with the policy. And I believe it's this experience that would enable me to move into that position if need be. However, I do want to make it very clear tonight that my focus is on the work and on the office of Lieutenant Governor and how I can serve Vermonters through that office. Thank you.
Ms. Preston?
Great, thank you so much for this question. I am uniquely qualified for the role of Lieutenant Governor because in large part I've been doing a lot of the work over the last 10 years. I've been traveling the state, I've been meeting with Vermonters, I've been elevating their voices, and I've been building a coalition of folks across the state to look at Vermont's most pressing issues and build a consensus around how we can move forward. I understand the other roles that come along with the office of Lieutenant Governor, and of course, if need be, would feel ready to move into that. That largely comes from my background and experience working with a budget, working with federal funding, increasing that budget by over 130%, and really thoughtfully and directly placing that money in places that have benefited Vermonters, built the cultural fabric of this state, and grown the organization that I lead exponentially. Thank you.
Can I ask you in 30 seconds to specify, how would you use the role of Lieutenant Governor to serve Vermonters?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So when I reference the work I've done at the Vermont Council on World Affairs, what I'm talking about is, so there's two primary functions of the Lieutenant Governor, and one is to preside over the Senate, and the other is to step into the role of the Lieutenant Governor if need be. And outside of that, I look at the role not as a part-time job, as it's assigned currently. I look at it as a full-time position, and I would use it to mobilize Vermonters, elevate the voices of Vermonters across the state, and bring experts to the table to help provide their perspective on policy that I could then use to support the Senate in passing legislation.
Thank you. Mr. Kimball?
Yeah, thank you. I'm seeking the office because I want to continue the work that I've started as a legislator, and that's really in workforce development. So I want to use the office really to focus on career development so that anyone who's willing in the state, can obtain a meaningful career and work that not only sustains them, but fulfills them. And also to focus on that affordability function, as I said earlier, to look at how to make it affordable for working families so that they don't struggle to pay for their housing costs, and they don't struggle to pay for their child care, and they don't struggle to put gas in the tank or food on the table or money in the bank. Again, the rhymes. And also to focus on the quality of life in Vermont. And that is to make sure that we do have clean air and clean water, and that we have access to the outdoors, that every town is vibrant. As Lieutenant Governor, I would be convening stakeholders that I already have relationships with, In my work as a legislator, I've been working with the people that are in workforce development. Everything that I focus on in this position would be focused on workforce development, whether it's housing, because we need people to build housing, whether it's in broadband, because we need technicians to build broadband, whether it's in climate control, because we need people to do the weatherization work. So I'm focused on that part, and that's why I'm running for Lieutenant Governor. I have the relationships with the stakeholders that are in those positions now, and I look forward to leveraging those to drive some of the policy that we can introduce in the legislature and through the administration. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Zuckerman.
Thank you. Having served as Lieutenant Governor for 4 years, I'm well aware of what the Lieutenant Governor can accomplish and can't in that office. And a lot of the work that the Lieutenant Governor can accomplish is that facilitating job of bringing people into the process. Meeting and working with Vermonters all across the state, as I've done not only as Lieutenant Governor, but in the 18 years prior as a legislator. I've traveled to all corners of the state when I was working on the issues I mentioned earlier, whether it was marriage equality, raising wages, health care, having those connections not just with stakeholders, but with everyday Vermonters across the whole landscape of Vermont, bringing them in. As Lieutenant Governor, I put out a newsletter to over 15,000 Vermonters regularly to help give them more information about the issues that were going on in Montpelier, so that also they could then reach out to their legislators and help participate in the process, not just have the folks in the building and the lobbyists in the building being the primary voices in the process. Right now I'm hearing a lot from Vermonters about the heaviness of the world. It's the housing crisis, the gas prices, democracy, war, food insecurity, resiliency. There are a lot of issues out there that are on people's minds, and I have done in the past and will do as Lieutenant Governor. I will amplify those voices and help them amplify themselves into the process. Thank you.
I want to ask a quick follow-up question to each of you, and I'll ask you to keep your responses to 30 seconds. Multiple Democratic Party strategists told VTDigger this spring that recruiting candidates for governor this year was challenging. If your interest lies with serving Vermonters, why did you choose not to run for governor? Mr. Zuckerman?
Well, I certainly tried that once, and it turned out that the timing was not the best. 8 weeks into that campaign, obviously the world turned upside down. I think we are still living with some of the ramifications of that. We also currently have a governor that, in the most recent polls, frankly, was getting 50% support from Democrats. And I think realistically, it's going to be a very difficult race for Brenda, who I do support. But for any of us, if we had entered that race, I think you've got 4 wise people here, and I think it was an uphill battle, very difficult.
Ms. Preston, same question to you.
Yeah, I really appreciate this question. While I am prepared and ready to step into the role of governor if need be, I'm running for lieutenant governor because it is the position out of all of them in this state that I am most qualified for. I have been traveling around the state, meeting with Vermonters, bringing them together, elevating voices, and doing a lot of the work that I see as a large part of the lieutenant governor's role already. And I look at this office as an extension of the work that I've been doing over the last decade in this state.
Ms. Holt?
Thank you for the question. My focus really is on the office of Lieutenant Governor and not the governor's position. I really enjoyed my time in the legislature, in the legislative process. And I feel in the office of Lieutenant Governor that I can continue that work by opening the office for fact-finding, information gathering, and bringing diverse groups of people together. I left the legislature on very good terms and with a lot of respect, and I would like to work with those groups to create more communication between the executive branch and the legislative branch. Communication is key, and working together and building coalitions is what I would do.
Representative Kimball, same question.
Yeah, thank you. Lieutenant Governor's job is a great job. I mean, if you look at it, you get to really cast a vision for what the future for Vermont should be without some of the day-to-day obligations of the legislature. So I look at it as being able to bridge gaps in between committees and agencies, and I really look forward to that work. So I think I look at the Lieutenant Governor's role as something that is very desirable, and that's why I'm running for the office.
Thank you.
Vermont's governor and lieutenant governor are elected separately and often hail from different parties. You are all Democrats. Our current governor is a Republican. If you were to find yourself working with a governor from the opposing party, how would you endeavor to work together towards common goals or push back on areas of disagreement? Ms. Preston?
I really love this question too, because I think it really hits on why I'm uniquely qualified for this position. What I've done over the last decade at the Vermont Council on World Affairs is work with people in an apolitical, nonpartisan way. So I bring together people, all those folks I mentioned earlier, that are Republicans, Libertarians, Progressives, Democrats, Independents. I bring together everybody. And I've learned how to move forward in consensus building and build a coalition of all Vermonters. And I would approach this office in the exact same way. And I would see myself working with whoever the governor is in a really successful way because of my background and my skills as a coalition builder, using civil discourse as a tool to move forward and the progress and prosperity that this state deserves. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Representative Kimball.
As a moderate Democrat and as serving in the legislature for 6 years, I've been working closely with the administration, and I get along with the administration on most issues. But I find that the Scott administration has been pragmatic and trying to find solutions for the Vermont people. I also approach things from a pragmatic standpoint. How can we solve the issues that are most important to the Vermont people? So that is what I've been focused on. That's what I will continue to be focused on. So I have great respect for the governor, and I have great respect for the people that work in state government. They put in incredible long hours. Oftentimes I'm texting with somebody from the administration at 9, 10 o'clock at night. They're always quick to respond. So I have no problems working with a Republican administration, and I look forward to the opportunity to work together with them.
Thank you. Mr. Zuckerman.
Well, thank you. I have worked with both Brenda Siegel and Governor Scott in different capacities for over 10 years. I would be able to work well with either one of them. One of the ideas I bring to whichever one of them becomes the next governor is really looking at the human services budget, which is the largest sector of state government, and the education budget, which is the second largest sector of state government, and really look on a multi-year effort to break down the barriers between the silos. We have two massive agencies in state government and funding in state government that serve many of the same populations, and yet in some parts of the state they work really well together, and in others they don't. I think this has a multiple positive outcome potential. Save money, run government more efficiently, which could then be used for some of the resources that we need, whether it's affordable housing, childcare, many other issues that we need to address, and better outcomes by actually blending some of these agency services, especially with those troubled children that need support early in life. Right now in government, we often solve problems at the end of the pipeline, and it's much more expensive when we do. If we take this time to invest to make our systems work better, to engage with challenged families and youth earlier, we can have a multiple positive bottom line. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hall.
Thank you, and this is a very important question. And regardless if the governor is a Democrat or a Republican, I would work with whoever is in that office. Obviously, it's sometimes much easier to work with somebody in the same party. However, I do have a long track record of working with the administration. Every day in the legislature, when you serve on appropriations, and especially if you serve as chair, you work with the administration. That is who comes in to testify. That is who you have your conversations with. And I have that experience, and I have had very good relationships with all of the agency commissioners and the secretaries that have come in to work on the state budget. I would continue that good work, that openness with the lieutenant, in the lieutenant governor's office, regardless if the governor is a Republican or a Democrat, and I look forward to that challenge.
Okay, so Mr. Zuckerman, you just mentioned a specific policy. For the other three candidates, I would like to ask a 30-second follow-up, specifically focusing on areas of policy. On what issue do you most firmly disagree with Governor Scott, and how would you respond to that issue differently? We'll go in the same order. Ms. Preston, will you go first?
Yeah, you know, when we talk about the issues that Vermonters are facing, I think that we need to talk first and foremost about housing. I think that it's not one issue in a silo, right? We have housing, we have affordable childcare, we have all of these different issues intersecting. And one bill that has really been prohibiting movement on that is Act 250. And while I think that it was made with the best of the intentions in the 70s, I think it's time for us to modernize it so that we can make changes to make housing more accessible and affordable for Vermonters. So I would have disagreed with him on his veto for Act 250.
Representative Hall.
Yeah, thank you. In the legislature, we have an opportunity to override the governor's vetoes, and that's a clear expression of the governor as to policy that he just doesn't agree with. One of the policies that he did veto was paid family medical leave, and that is the policy I disagree with in terms of his veto of that bill the most. We need to look at what it is for working families to try to make it when they don't have the resources in order to pay for their expenses, when they have to take time away from work. Paid family medical leave, I wasn't always a believer in it. I became a believer based on the testimony we heard in the legislature, and now I'm a full supporter of it.
Thank you. Ms. Hall?
Thank you. I have two, and I hope I have time. The first one would be the pensions. I was very sorry to see his veto on the pensions. When a group comes together from all stakeholders and come up with a compromise that will take $2 billion worth of liabilities off the pension problem, I thought that was a travesty to veto that bill and not come to the conversation sooner. And the clean heat standard was also vetoed. And if it's not the clean heat standard, another plan should have been on the table so we could move forward with climate change.
Thank you. Mr. Zuckerman, if you'd like to go ahead.
Well, thank you. Earlier I talked about how I work with him. This was an area we disagree, and the governor vetoed 11 bills this year. Construction contractor registry, prohibiting firearms within hospitals, the Brattleboro charter change to allow local voting for younger individuals, the pension bill, the clean heat standard, the Burlington charter change on just cause eviction, the drug decriminalization bill. Now it's just simply a study. Expanding eligibility to remove nonviolent crimes from a person's record, changes to Act 250, and finally, there were two more, but the opioid overdose prevention legislation. These are all areas that I disagree with the governor on.
Thank you all. So we've heard about a range of issues so far tonight, and now we're going to ask you to zero in on one. What do you see as the number one challenge facing Vermont today? What would you do as Lieutenant Governor to advance specific policy solutions? Representative Kimball, you go first.
Thank you. I was asked this question at the Hartford town meeting when we were voting at town meeting day, and my first knee-jerk reaction was, well, it's workforce, because that's what I'm most focused on. But really, in talking to people throughout the state of Vermont, you can't have workforce if they don't have housing. And it all comes back to housing. Housing then circles back because you don't have the people to build the housing. So they're interrelated. But I think all of it comes back to the quantity of affordable housing, the quality of housing that's affordable. And then we're talking about housing in all different ranges, low, middle, and upper middle income. So what I would do is make sure that we don't lose focus and that we look at building new, at renovating existing homes, and then also readapting commercial structures that aren't residential into housing units. Those are things that we can do. We've allocated or appropriated $250 million into housing over the past 3 legislative sessions. That's a significant amount of money. We used to fight over $100,000. So now we're talking a lot of money, but we have to make sure that we don't lose sight of what we're trying to do. And that is to meet people's housing needs at all different levels. So we've neglected new housing starts for 40 years in the state of Vermont. We need to look at incenting and making it easier to build housing. I would convene stakeholders as the Lieutenant Governor and to make sure that we are not losing focus and working with our partners, and we have some very good partners in the state of Vermont that are involved in housing. Thank you.
Ms. Holt, number one challenge facing Vermont.
Thank you. When I started on the campaign trail, I would say it's the economy that is the number one challenge with 3 areas, which would be broadband, because we need broadband in every corner of the state to attract workers here and to keep young people here. Housing issues that Charlie has articulately walked through, and also childcare. But what I have learned as I've been crisscrossing the state, the number one issue that I am hearing from Vermonters is climate change. They are worried about climate change. And we know Vermont is becoming a climate refuge. From states across this country, people are moving to Vermont because it looks like we are going to be in one of the best, safest places as more storms occur and fires occur in the West. And I believe that climate change is a forefront, and my kids tell me about it every day. I was very sorry, as I mentioned earlier, about the clean heat standard. And if that is not the plan, we need another plan on the table. And that needed to have happened before the end of the session from the administration. Now we will be two more years in order behind trying to meet our goals of emissions in 2025 and 2030. That's going to be difficult to do. But putting lots of money into electrification and weatherization, and we can be a model in this state for other states in addressing climate change. Thank you.
Mr. Zuckerman, 10 questions.
Thank you. I do believe it comes down to housing, but housing encompasses many other things. Housing, as was mentioned earlier, is workforce potential. We're seeing long-term rentals become Airbnbs, so people can't afford to live in our communities. We do need to invest in housing, but not just with the COVID money. That is fortunate that we have these extra hundreds of millions of dollars, but we have to find long-term sustainable funding that is greater than we had been doing, as Charlie mentioned earlier, by underfunding housing development. But housing is what is such a symbol of the income inequality that we face in the state. Folks are moving in, and with broadband it'll happen even more, from other states where they can sell their homes for twice the price what they can buy here. So income inequality is a housing issue. Long-term rentals, as I mentioned, those are disappearing. We need to think about ways to encourage folks with property that they can rent to stay with long-term rentals for our workforce and for our younger folks who are just getting out into the world. And ultimately, our housing stock is also part of our climate crisis. 34% of our carbon emissions are from heating in our homes, not only due to what we heat our homes with, but also how poorly insulated with our old housing stock that we had. And once again, we've always had balanced budgets in prior years, but we've never invested like we need to into weatherization. And when I talked with weatherization companies, they said, it's great to get a big bump for 2 years, but you can't invest in your equipment and your people if that's going to disappear. So we need a steady, long-term funding source for weatherization. Thank you.
Ms. Preston.
Thank you. As the other candidates on the stage here have alluded to, these issues are intersectional, and we cannot approach them in a silo. And that's why when we talk about these issues, we talk about 5 in a row. For me, they're all, as the other candidates have outlined, they're all connected. So we have climate action. We are facing an existential climate crisis. And for me, I think that we could build a green economy, which ties back to another priority. I think that we need to strengthen our rural communities. Largely, that's to helping develop our workforce. I also think affordability. We have an affordability crisis on our hands. So to go back to policies that I would support, to answer the question directly, is I would, when we talk about affordability and childcare, I would support Let's Grow Kids, the policy H171 Act 45, which Let's Grow Kids puts on their website, so I encourage you to go check it out, which helps address a lot of these issues. I also think I would, like I mentioned earlier, we need to modernize Act 250 so we can address the housing crisis, which we talked about. So there's another policy I think we need to look into, which David has outlined really why that's critical for us to do for many reasons. Because it's an equity issue, it's a climate issue, it's a workforce issue. It's all of these things. So thank you.
Thank you. So we will now have a round of candidate-to-candidate questions where you may query each other. Each of you will be able to choose another candidate and ask them a question. These should be questions, not speeches. You'll have 90 seconds to answer. We also may ask or allow for follow-up questions. Okay, so Ms. Toll, who would you like to query and what is your question?
Thank you. David, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm a proud, lifelong Democrat, but to get things done in Montpelier, you have to be willing to work across the aisle with Republicans, independents, and progressives. During my time in the legislature, I worked with 2 Republican governors, including Governor Scott's administration, when I was chair of appropriations and passed multiple budgets for the state of Vermont. Can you give an example when you were lieutenant governor of successfully working with the Scott administration?
Well, I appreciate the question, and for those that followed the last race, when I ran against the governor, you would have heard and understood that unfortunately before both Governor Scott and I were sworn in, he met with me with Jason Gibbs and said, I was part of this Shumlin administration and you're not going to be included in any of my administration. So admittedly, it was hard to work with him when he made that statement to start. However, after 6 months, got through the first session, I did reach out to the governor, we met, and I said, I've got these ideas. One of them I brought up earlier with respect to human services and education. And he did choose not to do that. He actually misrepresented the conversation as a taxes conversation, which it wasn't, in our debates. But I will, when I become lieutenant governor, extend the hand again. I'm prepared to work with him, as I did many Republicans, in passing legislation to address Lyme disease, cannabis reform, raise the minimum wage, and marriage equality. And I would say in terms of working across party lines, I'm the only candidate that's run with multiple party labels, as far as I know, and am more than happy to work across party lines to get work done. Sometimes in parties it becomes so party tribal and not issue-based. And I have a long, long track record of always focusing on the issues that matter to Vermonters, and that's how we've been successful in getting good policy done for everyday working Vermonters. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you both. Mr. Zuckerman, if you can query next.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to jump right into the question, not with a long preamble. But Patricia Preston, you have a lot of international experience, and this year the legislature, I think unanimously with the governor's idea, was to give $645,000 in aid to Ukraine. And so I'm curious, do you think that's had a positive impact on the people of Ukraine, and how do you think it could have been used to have more of an impact?
Great, thank you for that question. I think that it's important, what's happening in Ukraine. We have seen the images. We've seen what's happening to the families and to, just yesterday I hosted an event actually with the Vermont Council on World Affairs. It was an 8-hour full day conference focused on the refugee crisis, how we can help resettle folks here in this state, and what we can do in Ukraine and also here on the ground. And for me, what's most important is that families are able to have the access to the needs, have their needs met, right? And have access to support. And I think that for me, a lot of that in my work comes back to what we're doing on the ground in Vermont. So my work is largely building fertile ground here in this state to be a more receptive and welcoming place for refugees and asylees. And a lot of my work is also centered around education and understanding so that Vermonters are more welcoming and receptive when folks do arrive here. So I am in support of making sure that Ukrainians are cared for, that Vermonters are well educated on the issues, and that basic needs are met for all people.
So Ms. Preston, who would you like to query, and what is your question?
Sure, thank you. My question is for Kitty. So Kitty, it's my understanding that you were one of only a few Democrats to vote no on S54, which was establishing a legal cannabis market in Vermont, and one of only fewer Democrats to vote no on H511, decriminalizing possession of small amounts of marijuana. And so my question to you is, what do you say to the folks that were most impacted by these policies? I paused and hesitated because of the face you were making, but this is what I've seen in your voting record, and I'm curious what you have to say to the marginalized communities that are impacted by that vote.
And I thank you for that vote, and I'm sure that I was a supporter of decriminalization. I've always talked about decriminalization. But for your first question, the first piece, I received a lot of calls, and I had a lot of meetings with small farmers in my area that really felt they were going to be left out of the market. And they were concerned with how the legislation was going to progress and how the board would be determined and how rules would be written. And so my no vote was out of respect to the farmers that I heard from plenty of them, that they felt that they would really be left out of the market and that cannabis would be controlled by all large buyers. And so it was a protest vote for my farmers. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kimball, Who would you like to query and what is your question?
Thank you. My question is for Kitty Toll.
Oh, well, thank you, Charlie.
You're welcome. You may not have to do that. So Kitty, the last 3 legislative sessions have been brutal. I think any of the legislators in the audience can attest to that. Operating by Zoom, a mask policy, no mask policy, trying to legislate in remote conditions or distributed workforce conditions. And then you left the legislature right in the middle of our COVID pandemic. So my question to you is, why'd you leave?
That's an excellent question, Charlie. The short answer is what my sister always said, leave before your past due date. So I don't feel that I was near my sell-by date. Actually, it's sell-by date, not your past due date, but your sell-by date. The reason I left the legislature was I had been thinking even from the term before new opportunities and new direction that I would go in. And being one term as chair of appropriations, I really felt the committee needed a chair for 2 terms, for 4 full years. I felt comfortable leaving at the time I left because the federal dollars had come in, $1.25 billion, and all of those were appropriated in the term that I left. I had no idea that another $1.25 billion would come in, and infrastructure money would come in, and monies to our municipalities and to our towns. I felt comfortable with that first $1.25 billion going out. I felt that we were going in a good direction, and I knew that there would be new opportunities and new challenges and new things on the horizon, and I thought a new voice from Danville, a new young member, would also be healthy for our community. And that's why I left. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll now have another round of questions for each of you. Last year, a record 210 Vermonters died of an opioid overdose. That number is a third higher than the previous year. How do you think Vermont should address the overdose crisis? Ms. Preston?
Yeah, so thank you for this question. This goes back to one of the vetoes that I was really disappointed to see that the governor made, H728, which was the opioid overdose response services. And this would have really, these prevention sites could have helped us exponentially. And I think everyone knows we're facing an opioid crisis in this state, and it needs to be addressed. I've had the opportunity to travel around the state and go to a lot of different facilities that are doing some really amazing work. And I actually went to one in St. Albans recently where, we're not just facing, when I say that these issues are intersectional, we're not just facing the issue of the opioid crisis. When people get back on their feet and they want to get back out into the community, there's no housing for them. And it goes back to this cycle of all of the issues intersecting with each other. And as the next Lieutenant Governor, I would hope to really dive into these issues, bring those stakeholders together, elevate the voices that are most impacted by this crisis, and make sure they're a part of the process in really solving the problems.
Thank you. Ms. Toll?
Thank you for the question. Too many people have died at no fault of their own, and the opioid crisis is just continuing and continuing. One thing that I have seen on the campaign trail, and I'm so happy, was a visit to Jenna's Promise in the Morrisville area, actually in the Johnson area. This is a model that I think needs to be used across the state and across the country. If you haven't visited, it's just an incredible facility. It totally encompasses a person who is in need of help. And when I visited, I had the opportunity to talk with people who are in recovery, and one young man and I are continuing to text one another and just giving him any encouragement I can. But what the model is you receive counseling, you receive a whole path to recovery, you receive housing, you receive food, and they even create jobs in the Johnson area so that you are employed and that you have money. And medication assistance is also there. It's a family atmosphere, and it's all encompassing from supports to your meals, to your housing, and to all the counseling that you would need. And it's that type of investment that we need to see across the state and across the country to really care for people that are suffering at no fault of their own.
Mr. Zuckerman, same question.
Thank you. My neighbor actually works at the Howard Center as one of the lead folks on the opioid epidemic and the tragedy that has befallen so many families. And I have heard too many stories about ways that the government bureaucracy slowed resources going into support services. In the case of Jenna's Promise, thankfully money went there quite a bit, I think as much as $1 million, over $1 million, maybe $1.5 million over the last few years of state dollars. And that's one location. If we're going to do that statewide, we have to be committed to raising the money to do that. And I think I'm one of the few candidates that's run statewide that has talked about the need to actually raise more revenues from those that can afford it to pay for the things that we need in our society. And frankly, we need more programs like Jenna's Promise, but we also need to get bills through and hopefully not have them vetoed that will explore other remedies. Safe injection sites. We know that too many people, they die immediately after having opioids in their system, often laced with fentanyl or other drugs. If there were safe injection sites, we would be there to revive them and get them back on their feet. And then we need to have the wraparound services to help them stay sober as best as they can with those wraparound services. And again, one of those places to get the resources is that human services education, massive $2 billion and $1.5 billion arenas. So I would reappropriate some of those dollars if I had the power to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Kimball?
Thank you. Now, I went to Springfield this morning to talk to them about the sudden gun violence that they had experienced because of some of the drug issues and the drug trafficking that was coming up from Route 91. Not knowing at the same time that there would be some gun violence in my own town of Woodstock yesterday. Not related to not related to drugs, but it was just a strange juxtaposition of the conversations. But in Springfield, we were talking about that drug highway. And we were talking about different things such as a three-legged stool of prevention, enforcement, and recovery. So if we think about recovery, that is one where the legislature has made some good moves in terms of medically assisted treatments in our facilities and also making that more available through the hub and spoke system. It doesn't work perfectly, but it does work better than it did before. But enforcement, if we think about the need for more police officers that we have in the state, it is a huge gap and a huge crisis. Some of it is training opportunities, some of it is the kind of benefits that we offer in comparison to New Hampshire and others. So we do have a need for increasing our enforcement and bulking up, I would say, with responsible policing for enforcement. And then prevention. We have done some things in the legislature about prevention in terms of limiting the amount of pills that can be prescribed by a doctor for after operations have been done. That is effective, it helps. But as Lieutenant Governor, I would want to convene the stakeholders that have a seat at the table and figure out what the right policy is going forward for the next steps to take to prevent these unnecessary deaths.
Thank you. So our next question comes from a reader who wrote in. So Thomas Nola of Topson wrote, quote, "We've been living in Vermont for 36 years and have no intention of leaving. It's a beautiful state and place to live. However, as retirees, it's not tax friendly." End quote. Do you believe that tax relief is needed? If so, which reforms would you champion? Ms. Preston, you would go first.
Great, thank you for this. I would like to say that I would support modifying the eligibility requirements to reduce tax on Social Security benefits for folks, to be more inclusive of moderate and low income families, because we need to keep this family that wrote in, we need to keep them here. I also love Vermont, and I want it to be a place that I can stay and live and that my parents can stay and live. And I think that that would be one solution that we could look into. I also think that we have a problem where young people move out of state. I moved out of state for more economic opportunity, and I know many other of my friends did, and I made a conscious choice to come back. But one thing that I think that we could do, and numerous studies have shown that there are benefits to home ownership for families and communities. And I think that we could expand the mortgage credit certificate for first-time home buyers beyond the federal tax credit of $2,000. So we can make it easier for first-time home buyers to stay in Vermont. Because when we talk about the issues that we're facing, like workforce, we need to address the issues that the workforce here is facing first and foremost, and then we need to address those workforce issues and get people back here, the Vermonters that want to move home or others from around this country and world that want to move to the state and make Vermont their home and make it more accessible to them. And I think that these are two really simple things that we could do to be effective with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Toll.
Thank you for this question. When I was in the legislature, I really relied on the very good work of the Ways and Means Committee and the Finance Committee in the Senate. And so when I think about taxes and I think about the conversations those committees have had, one area that I would pursue and move more heavily on is funding our education system. Our education system is funded based on property taxes. And this quite often hits retired families, retired individuals at a very high rate. If you've lived in your home for a very long time and you happen to have a wonderful view, or you're on a lake or a pond or on Lake Champlain, those values have skyrocketed, which has skyrocketed your property taxes as well. I would like to see more work done based on the results of the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission to move the education tax to the income tax so that there is more fairness. And we know that there is some income tax because of income sensitivity, but I would like it explored across the entire tax base and to see what it would look like for the income tax to replace the property tax as recommended by the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kimball.
Thank you. So if you look at the big tax buckets, we look at income taxes, sales taxes, rooms and meals taxes, property taxes, estate taxes. And there's a big salad of different taxes to take a look at. Vermont has one of the most progressive tax structures in the country. And for those that have the ability to pay taxes, to pay for the services. So we do have the Tax Structure Commission report with several recommendations, some of which have been considered, but not really enacted yet by the legislature. So I push the legislature to actually take those up in the next sessions and really try to do that as Lieutenant Governor. I've had relatives move out of state because of the tax structure. And I've had friends move out of the state because of the tax structure. If we think about property taxes, 70% of the people in Vermont are eligible to get some kind of adjustment based on their income to property taxes. When you have a tax that 70% get some kind of exemption on, then that's not the right tax. So we need to take a look at that. If we look at some of the estate taxes, where the federal right now is over $11 million as an exemption, and Vermont is at $5 million, we have to anticipate as to what is that federal exemption going to come down to. Likely it'll come down to 5, and Vermont will be fine. But we need to match up what Vermont is doing with what the federal tax exemption is doing for estate taxes, or else we're going to lose people there. But we can't ignore the fact that we do want the people that are at the lowest end of the scale in terms of their income to be able to afford to live here. And then some of that is taxes, the other is cost of living. And that comes back to affordable housing, it comes back to child care, and it comes back to those issues that are closest to home. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Zuckerman.
Thank you. I think it's a fascinating topic because there's a lot of discussion of how we can lower taxes for folks. But we've also talked about more affordable housing or more investment in child care. That takes money. So when folks offer, I would cut this or look at expanding that tax break, I have to ask, what then would they also cut as far as the services for struggling Vermonters? I think I'm the only one here again who has talked about the fact that, yes, while we have a very progressive tax system, we still, over the last 40 years at the federal level, have seen taxes drop tremendously for the wealthiest people, whether they're in Vermont or across the country. And we have deferred maintenance on our roads. We have deferred maintenance on our schools. We have deferred maintenance in our people. And if we continue to aggregate wealth in the few's hands while deferring maintenance for our society, we will continue to struggle. And so I will be the one that speaks up and says, we can raise more revenue from those who right now aren't feeling the gas price pinch. They aren't feeling the housing jump of $50,000 or $100,000 pinch. that group of folks who are decent people in Vermont, I'm not against them as individuals, but they can't afford, when society is struggling, to put more into our broader well-being. And so I would raise those revenues in order to consider any number of these important investments, either Social Security tax breaks or affordable housing, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. So our final segment with the Democratic candidates tonight will be a lightning round. Each of you will have a chance to answer these questions, but please do so in just a few words. So, if you had to complete the governor's term, would you retain their cabinet or would you appoint your own? Ms. Preston.
I would probably have a mix of folks if I could. I would keep some people. I think historical content and knowledge is important, and folks that are in there, I think it's great, but I also think fresh ideas and fresh perspectives and new people are also good, and I would have it.
Thank you. Representative Kimball.
I would keep a lot of them. I know a lot of them, and they're very competent and talented people like Greg on the tax department. But I would like my new staff in terms of policy direction and chief of staff, that kind of stuff. My campaign manager would make a great chief of staff.
Ms. Hall.
Thank you. It would also be a mix for me. During appropriations, there were many people in the governor's cabinet that are incredible workers and have great experience and are very bright and creative. And I'm sure I'd bring my own staff in as well. So it would definitely be a mix, by keeping the brightest and the best.
Mr. Zuckerman.
I don't think there's much difference amongst us here. I have great respect for many of the folks in the cabinet. There are some I disagree with and would want some new blood. But as I said in the election 2 years ago, that I certainly would have kept the COVID team, for instance. When you're in the middle of a big project, you keep the people who have started that project to make sure it gets completed well.
Okay. Lightning round. A little bit. Okay. Do you believe that statewide office holders in Vermont, including the lieutenant governor, should serve 2-year or 4-year terms? Representative Kimball.
4.
Ms. Hull.
4.
Mr. Zuckerman.
4 the first term and 2 after that.
Ms. Preston. 4. Thank you. Many previous lieutenant governors have used this role as a springboard to higher office. Would you commit tonight that you will not seek higher office during your time as lieutenant governor? Mr. Zuckerman.
No.
Representative Kimball.
Commit during running for lieutenant governor, as lieutenant governor? I would say no.
After you're elected.
After
currently
elected.
serving the office.
Yeah, never say never, but no.
Ms. Hall.
No one knows what the future holds, and so you can't commit yourself, so I have to say no.
Ms. Preston.
Yeah, I'm also no, but want to add on to that I'm just saying no because I'm very committed to the role of lieutenant governor.
Thank you. Would you support a state-level ban on assault weapons? Ms. Preston.
Yes.
Representative Kimball.
As defined by large-size magazines to be rapidly changed, yes.
Mr. Zuckerman.
Similar to Representative Kimball, they're undefined, so it makes it difficult to answer the question.
What about a semi-automatic firearm with either a detachable magazine or a magazine with a capacity of 10 or more rounds?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Hall.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We already did ban the magazines over 10 rounds.
Oh, thank you.
That made my answer easier.
Redefine the term. Should Vermont end qualified immunity for law enforcement officers? Representative Kimball.
Difficult question because of the hardworking people in the police department. I would say no, but with qualifications.
Ms. Hall.
Everybody has to be accountable for their actions, but we have to be wary of unintended consequences, and so it's a much larger discussion.
Yes or no? Would you or would you not end qualified immunity?
Not without more discussion of what the unintended consequences could be.
Mr. Zuckerman.
Yes, it's part of a larger public health discussion, but nobody is above the law, whether it's our past president, law enforcement, or any of us in this room.
Ms. Preston.
I would actually just say that I would support S254, which is
looking into this exact thing. And so, no, I wouldn't end it as it stands, but it's a much larger conversation, and there needs to be a much bigger holistic approach, but I do support S254. Since the lieutenant governorship is a part-time job, would you plan to hold another job, and if so, what job? Ms. Preston. Leading an organization, what I know for sure is that it takes all of your energy and all of your time to do this job. And I wouldn't see myself holding another position. And I look at this job, as I said before, as a full-time job, not a part-time. Thank you. Representative Kimball.
Do you think my employer's listening? Because that may change my answer. So I'm currently working full-time in the software development business, and I would continue to work for that company, but not on a full-time basis. Currently what I'm doing now.
Thank you. Ms. Toll.
I would make it a full-time job serving Vermonters.
Mr. Zuckerman.
I made it a full-time job when I was last lieutenant governor, and I will again, but I also work 16-hour days, and on a farm in the morning and in the evening. I would keep that operation going. But as I get older, my wife and I have decided maybe we wouldn't anymore. Thank you much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all. I wish we could spend more time with all of you, but we have another segment to our program tonight. So that will conclude our debate with the Democratic candidates for Lieutenant Governor. Thanks again. I want to once again thank Representatives Thayer Kimball, Patricia Preston, Kitty Toll, and David Zuckerman. We're going to ask these four candidates to leave the stage and take their seats. Meanwhile, we will invite our Republican candidates to join us. And once they get seated, we'll begin the second portion of our program. Please don't go anywhere, folks. If you're watching at home, please stay with us. We're just going to take a moment here to turn over the stage. You all are welcome to leave. We'll invite our two Republican candidates up now. Thanks. We're going to get started once again. Thanks everyone for sticking with us. And Ryan,
So we have our two candidates in the Republican primary for Lieutenant Governor. Senator Joe Benning has served in the Vermont Senate since 2011, including 2 stints as Senate Minority Leader. He lives in Lyndonville. Mr. Gregory Thayer has served as a Rutland City Alderman and previously served as chair of the Rutland City Republican Party. So we will follow roughly the same format for this portion of the debate. We plan to allow for the same number of questions as we had in the first half, but we do expect this portion to run a bit shorter since we have only 2 candidates in this round. Some questions will be the same as those asked of the Democratic candidates, and some will vary. We'll start with opening statements. While introducing yourself to voters, please tell us what experience you have that prepares you to serve as Vermont's next Lieutenant Governor. You will each have 90 seconds. Mr. Thayer, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Gregory Thayer from Rutland. I'm a former city alderman and I'm a Republican Party leader on various levels and over the last 25 years. I'm running because I have a constitutional right to do so in a capitalist society. I believe in freedom, risk-taking, and creating opportunity. And we live in a constitutional republic. I do not have the Montpelier mentality. In the last year, I traveled across the state of Vermont doing critical race theory, town halls, and Americanism, Marxism symposiums. I served in the Rutland City Board of Aldermen, and I'm a professional business person with 35 years of experience. 24 years in banking. Currently, I work as a financial accountant. I'm the father of 4 adult children. My 2 sons are married, and I have my first grandchild. I've been very active in my community, and I have proven everyday leadership skills together with working with people, many people from different areas and levels. My qualifications are important to me and important to this position, in that I believe that I have the experience and the will, the strength and the love of Vermont to be the 84th Lieutenant Governor of the state of Vermont. That being said, I look forward to representing you all under the Golden Dome. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Benning.
Riley, Michael, thank you very much for hosting us here this evening. Paul, thank you as well, especially for the water. I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about me. I am Joe Benning. I'm a trial attorney by trade, having practiced in that profession for the past 40 years, representing people mostly in criminal and family court matters. I am a previous chair of the Vermont Human Rights Commission, and much to my surprise, I am the first person on this podium table, if you will, this evening, to actually want to talk about the job that I'm running for. It's called the Lieutenant Governor. That's what it says up on the sign. And the folks that you have heard here tonight have been talking about something that has almost nothing to do with that particular office. This is a little bit of inside baseball. The Lieutenant Governor has three primary functions. They moderate the Senate. I've been there for 12 years. They appoint people to the committee on committees. They're a part of the committee on committees, and they appoint people to their committee assignments and the chairs. I know all the players. And finally, should the governor actually be unable to fulfill his duties, they step into the governor's role. Those three core functions of the office are very important to me, as the Senate faces a turnover of 1/3 of its body, and we are still coming out of COVID-19. I bring a great deal of institutional knowledge to this discussion. I have a great love of that body, and I'm hoping to be your next Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you. Our first question may sound a bit familiar and may kind of allow you to expand on that, Senator Benning. The Lieutenant Governor has certain responsibilities in the state Senate and is in the line of succession to the governor, but on a day-to-day basis, the role is largely ceremonial. How would you use this office to actually serve Vermonters? And Senator Benning will stay with you to start.
I keep hearing the term ceremonial office. It would be anything but a ceremonial position in my eyes. If you walk in the building from the west door, the very first door you come across is that of the Lieutenant Governor. That door, in my eyes, will always remain open. I have given tours of that building to so many people I can't count. Last night was the last one of about 15 people who have never been in the State House before. The institution of the General Assembly is very important for me, and I do my best to educate people on a daily basis. So when I hear the term ceremonial position, that becomes a full-time position for me to try to advocate as much as I can for the state's history and our glorious past. And the fact is, that's an office that is a golden opportunity to become a promoter for Vermont. That's what I want to use the position for, and I will give up my law practice in the event that I am elected to that position. So when I hear ceremonial, that's not what I see it as.
Thank you. Mr. Thayer, same question.
Thank you. I don't like the word ceremonial either because I think it's a lot more. I'm planning on to work like Brian Dewey did. He worked with Cuba on some cow deals. He worked with Canada. I'm going to be a proactive, positive, effective leader in the Lieutenant Governor's position. One of 6 constitutional offices in our state constitution, the Lieutenant Governor. Since we know what he does. Mr. Bennings described it. And I'm going to be proactive. I'm going to work legislation. I have things that I want to talk about, things I want to try to get done. And I've worked across the aisle. I've found common ground. And I know that I can be that person that can work and open up. My door will always be open. I did that as a professional banker. I've done that as an accountant. I do that in everyday life. Raising 4 children, I listen. I listen to a lot of people as I tour the state, and I'll keep listening and working hard for every Vermonter. It doesn't matter, your stripes. This is Vermont, and we are the people. Thank you.
Thank you. So, what do you see as the #1 challenge facing Vermont? And what would you do as Lieutenant Governor to advance policy solutions? Senator Benning.
The #1 problem is still the same problem that we are facing back when Phil Scott first got elected governor. There is an affordability crisis here today. I don't know about any of you, but coming down here from Lindenville tonight cost me $96 to fill up my gas tank. That is going to be exacerbated many times over as we approach winter and people are trying to put fuel into their heating systems. We have a severe problem in this state. I've heard many people talk about how they've crisscrossed the state and investigated and spoken to people. Well, as of tonight, I have 27 towns left to go on my 250 Club tour of the state that began last week in April. My bottom dollar is, other than Greg, who happens to live here, none of the other folks you listen to tonight have any idea where Route 153 is that runs up from Rupert up into not Pollitt, but Polk. That's crisscrossing the state, meeting people on a one-to-one basis and having that conversation everywhere I get a chance to go to. So I'm going to be the person who actually helps Phil Scott continue to keep his fingers in the dike. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Thayer?
Okay, thank you. It's affordability. It's the cost of living. And every day you pick up the paper, you see these new bills. I understand over 1,000 bills introduced in the legislature this last session, maybe the biennium. It's just trying to regulate everything, and I lay the fault at the Democratic leadership on what's going on in our high costs. There are some items, there are some things that are definitely on at the federal level, but I firmly believe that we need to look at different ways to find different solutions for our problems. It's not all about taxing and creating more taxes. It's about finding ways to make things happen, make things work that'll help the everyday Vermonter. And again, it's not about big government. It's a lot of times it's about we the people. It's the people standing up, stepping forward, and doing the right thing. Government cannot be all things to all people, period. There's just no way. It's too expensive. It's too expensive. We have a lot of people leaving. I have a son and his wife are looking at relocating. It saddens me. Thank you.
So affordability came up for both of you, and I want to drill down on specifics a little bit more. Specifically, how would you use the office of Lieutenant Governor to advocate for solutions to affordability?
First?
Sure. Thank
I've
you.
actually used the position of state senator to try to advocate for a smarter approach to this. On several occasions, I have approached the leadership on both sides of the aisle and said, why don't we take just 1 year? Just 1 year to have leadership turn to their respective caucuses and say, this year, we are not going to propose any new legislation. Instead, we're going to ask every single committee of jurisdiction to take a look at what it governs and decide what it is we need as opposed to what it is we have. And that's a very hard conversation, but it has to start somewhere. Unfortunately, last person I tried to bring that up to, Nancy Johnson, the previous Speaker of the House, rolled her eyes, and that was the end of the conversation. But it's worth talking about. We've just spent $8.2 billion for 640,000 people, a large portion of which is federal money that is about to dry up.
Thank you, Senator Gunning. I'm sorry, 30-second follow-up. Should have specified that. Mr. Thayer.
Thank you. In our budget this year is $8.3 billion. A year ago it was $7.6 billion. And 15, 20 years ago, I remember it was $775 million. We did get a lot of money through the COVID, ARCA money. What's going to happen to those programs? I think we need to take a step back and start looking at what we're doing, what we're spending money on. I do have a tax plan that hopefully we're going to get to. Not quite there, yet here in the discussion. But I think that we need to all find solutions within ourselves.
We will get to Texas later. Red is you're out of time.
Okay,
Yellow means you have 30 seconds left if we're on a 90-second question.
I probably read that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. I want to move on. Members of your party, including former President Donald Trump, have claimed that election fraud led to an illegitimate result in the 2020 presidential election. Those claims have been widely disproven, including by judges in dozens of court cases and by federal officials in the Trump administration, yet many Republicans continue to repeat them. Do you believe the 2020 election results were legitimate? And what effect do you think this kind of rhetoric will have on future elections? Mr. Thayer, you can go first.
Thank you. Not sure if they're legitimate, but they are what they are, and we have a constitution, and we need to adhere to that document. I believe we need to learn from what happened. I also believe that people ought to watch the movie 2,000 Mules. They'll learn a lot. It's an eye-opener, and I think it's important to know everything, to see the whole spectrum. Joe Biden is our president, and I think the key to me is communication, is us talking, listening, and being respectful to the other side, because we sure do have a lot of problems, and we need to work together. Thank you.
I want to ask a quick follow-up, Mr. Thayer, and we can just spend 30 seconds on this, but you previously told VTDigger that you attended the Washington, D.C. rally on January 6th that preceded the attack on the U.S. Capitol. Do you stand by your decision to attend that event?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I'm proud I was there. I did not go into the Capitol. I was on the lawn after we heard the president speak, and I did hear a police officer say, around the building is open, it's open. Unfortunately, I saw a gentleman have a heart attack and die. We prayed over him when he was taken out in the gurney. But yes, I do stand by my decision to be there. The picture that was on the Vermont Digger page a couple months ago, was not, that was a Photoshop, but I think it's illustrated in the caption. Because I didn't have an umbrella and I did not have an American flag in my hand down there. It was cold and we were just walking about. Our bus left at 3:30. And yeah, I do. I think President Trump did a great job. His delivery system, a little unorthodox. Didn't always agree with it. I wasn't a Trump supporter in the start, but I became one.
That's our time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Benning, the same question, and I'll repeat the original question. Do you believe the 2020 election results were legitimate? And what effect do you think rhetoric questioning it will have on future elections?
To directly answer your question, I do believe that the election was legitimate. I, as a lawyer, sat patiently waiting while allegations were raised that there had been widespread fraud. I knew the president had the opportunity to contest things in court. But after 64 court appearances in various states and the United States Supreme Court, it became very apparent to me as a lawyer that there was absolutely no evidence. And it is unfortunate that my party is now finding itself in a situation where we carry the seed that has been planted. Every election from now on is going to be challenged by the loser in such a way that they're going to claim fraud, and we're going to go through this in every single election moving forward. It is unfortunate. It should never have happened, and I'm waiting patiently for those in my party to come around and recognize that even after Bill Barr has now said it was not true, and Ivanka Trump has said it was not true, my party has got to wake up and recognize we have to move on from the 2020 election.
I want to ask another quick follow-up here, and just 30 seconds on this. I want to ask each of you, what values do you think are central to the Republican Party right now? How would you answer the question, what is a Republican? Senator Benning, we'll stay with you first.
5 core things I believe in as a Republican. Individual liberty, low taxes, which comes along with efficient government, a school system that enables our graduates to compete in a global marketplace, a free market economy, and personal responsibility. They are all wrapped together by a glue called the Constitution. That is my belief of what a Republican is, no more, no less.
Mr. Thayer, same question?
Thank you. Liberty, low taxes, efficient and effective government, about we the people, limited government at every level. Too much overspending doesn't help the country or people individually. It's pretty much me.
Thank you.
So now we're going to have our candidate-to-candidate questioning, since there's only 2 of you. Have your questions ready. You'll each have 90 seconds to answer, and we may ask or allow for follow-ups. Senator Benning, go first.
Greg, I'm terribly curious. You stood on the steps of the State House with a sign that said, "Support our police." You were at the nation's capital listening to Donald Trump at the Ellipse and stepped off the curb and started marching down the street. For whatever reason, it motivated you to leave that area and go towards the Capitol. And then you're in the middle of a crowd that is screaming to hang Mike Pence and was assaulting physically police officers. Do you suppose that Vermont's voting demographic has a right to be a little confused about those two separate positions?
I was there probably, and didn't hear those chants. Really wasn't on the lawn long enough to hear all that stuff. It started materializing. I was standing there, and they were putting up the barriers, if you will, as the Capitol police officers, because the Capitol was open, and they were telling people to go around the back. I marched down the street because the program said that's what we were doing. That's what the president said people were doing. He didn't say go down there and start a riot. He went down there and peaceably protest, which we have that right under the First Amendment to our Constitution. Unfortunately, there's bad cops too. That's why the last group just talked about qualified immunity. And there's there's a lot of evidence out there, Joe. You can say there isn't, but there is. Take 5 minutes and go watch, an hour and a half and go watch 2,000 Mules. Maybe you'll learn something about what went on. There's a lot of facts. And so I stand with police every day as long as they're doing their job and they're law-abiding. There's evidence today that FBI agents were agitators in the groups. We saw people in the group dressing in Trump gear, getting off buses. So, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't hear anything about what was going on. People were going to storm. And we had nobody in Vermont on our bus that went down there and did anything like that. So it was a great day that went bad because of a few, unfortunately. Thank you. Thank you.
Follow-up?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
We'll keep the response to 30 seconds. Thanks.
You left the ellipse with a group of people that knew Congress was in the process of trying to count electoral votes. What was your thought about why you were going down the street?
Like I said, go down and just basically be there. Seeing history, being that close to history of what's going on. Nobody ever said anything about going down and starting a riot or fighting or anything. I was consumed in the gentleman, a lady that fell off, one of the towers, if you will, this monument towers, and watching that, that guy. We were more concerned. We were praying over the gentleman. So I wasn't thinking like that. We had to be back at our bus for a takeoff at 3:30, and we got lunch in the interval. So, thank you.
Mr. Thayer, your question for Senator Benning.
Oh, okay. Senator, you've been in the legislature for nearly 12 years. How many bills have you introduced? How many bills have made a positive effect on individual Vermonters that have passed the full legislature? I'm not talking about bills that support the local high school team or the Latin words in the 14th star or the road markers around the state or in Virginia. I'm talking about bills that you introduced, that you started from legislative council through the process. Thank you.
Fair question, Gregory, but since I don't know how many bills I've actually introduced, and there are a lot of them, I'm having trouble recalling a lot of them, but let me start with one that's very important to every woman in this room. If you are a woman who suffers from a condition, I call it that because I don't know what the proper terms are, of having dense breast tissue, doctors are now required by law, a bill that I introduced, to make sure you go beyond the mammogram in order to make sure you don't have breast cancer. I think that works pretty good. The other thing that I introduced was the very first bill, S7, way back in 2011, that called for a process called expungement. As of last month, over 25,000 Vermonters have taken advantage of having their criminal records erased, all minor offenses from years ago, so that people who are now grandparents and were being prevented from attending as chaperones their grandchildren's school trips now have the ability to do that. That's two examples I can come off with the top of my head.
Thank you both.
We spoke to the Democratic candidates about working with a governor of the opposing party. Either of you would be likely to work in the State House along a membership and leadership that is solidly Democratic. On what issue do you most firmly disagree with leadership in the legislature, and how would you, as Lieutenant Governor, respond to that issue differently? Mr. Bennett.
Are you talking about my own leadership or the other side's leadership?
I'm talking about the leadership of both chambers, the Democratic leadership.
That was supposed to be funny. Supposed to work. I want to start by saying I believe Phil Scott is going to be our next governor. I also know Brenda Siegel, and I watched her every day when she was parked out on the front portico of the State House. And one morning as I was walking in, it was extremely cold. And she and whoever else she was with, I felt really bad for, so I invited them into the State House and I bought them breakfast. That's the kind of person I am because I don't see party politics getting in the way of that. When we talk about what the Democrats are doing right now, one of the things that I'm concerned about after listening to the folks on this stage tonight, after we've just spent $8.2 billion, and we know the money is going to dry up, or at least a large portion of it is going to dry up, we have to start paying attention that we are trying to do way beyond our means. And we're not going to be able to sustain it. And if I've got 10 seconds left, I would like to have every Rutland legislator in the room stand up for just a second. Or past legislator. Please, before my time runs out. Every single one of these people from Rutland has endeavored through their service in the State House to try to make sure Phil Scott's affordability crisis argument is front and center. And we've been in a minority for so long that it's gotten very frustrating. And that's one of the reasons why I'm seeking the office of Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you. Mr. Thayer, same question.
Is the question about the legislature or the governor?
So the question is, you would likely in this role be working in the State House alongside membership and leadership that is solidly Democratic. On what issue do you most firmly disagree with the Democratic leadership in the legislature right now? And how would you as Lieutenant Governor respond differently?
There are so many policies, so many bills that I disagree with. And I hear those frustrations from my representatives. Larry Copley is my rep, my senators, Brian Collmore, Josh Terenzini. There's just so many bills. But to put my fingers on two would be the Global Warming Solutions Act. What that's going to do to the little man, the everyday Vermonter, the farmer. You think gas prices are expensive today? Home heating fuel, it's going to go through the roof. It's going to be, get ready for the heating oil crunch this winter. Also, Prop 5, big issue to me that I don't believe it needs to be enshrined in our Constitution. We have abortion up until minutes before birth, if you will. And there's just a slew of other things. I'll just end there. Thank you.
Can I ask a quick follow-up just to, and if we can keep this to 30 seconds, but if you were to become Lieutenant Governor, how would you respond to those two issues you identified differently?
I would just work with people, bring stakeholders in. Stakeholders are folks from all around the state at all income levels and talk and try to do a better. I think they rushed through the Global Warming Solutions Act and the Climate Council and everything. I just think we need to talk to people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I want to turn to specific policy issues. Again, thinking about that the Lieutenant Governor would assume the office of the governor if the governor was unable to continue the job. So I want to return to this question from Thomas Noah Thompson, who had some questions about tax relief and affordability. So do you believe that tax relief is needed? And if so, which reforms would you champion? Mr. Thayer.
I believe tax relief is desperately needed, but I also believe the makeup of the legislature is desperately needed. I would, we're working on a consumption tax, getting rid of all Vermont taxes, everything, from meals and rooms, gas, payroll tax, can't tax payroll, property tax, everything, to a consumption tax. That would tax every time you go to the marketplace. But it would also pick up all that illegal money, the gambling, the prostitution, the drug sales. It would pick up everything. And we're working on numbers, and think that's something that we need to look at. Every time, something happens, everybody, rushes to raise taxes, increase taxes, or they threaten to cut services. I like public-private partnerships. When I was on the city council here in Rutland, we talked about public-private partnerships. Glens Falls did it, retained and hired more employees in the VTDigger department, and they also, employees got bonuses. I think there's ways we need to be creative in our thinking, we need to be creative in what we're doing. But I really look at the consumption tax because of the way it would hit so many other avenues. Thank you.
I just want to ask a quick, possibly 30-second follow-up to understand what you just said. Do you support getting rid of state-level income tax entirely?
Yes, I would. I'd get rid of state income tax. I'd get rid of every tax known to Rutland. I worked in the Vermont tax department. I was an auditor, and I'd get rid of all those taxes and make government more efficient, more effective. Have one tax, a consumption tax, and at whatever percent, we're not quite there yet in our calculations, but it's something we're working on, and I think it's a good plan, and yes, I would.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Benning.
I don't know where to begin, but I'll begin small. I was the lead sponsor 2 years ago on the governor's requests to get rid of the tax on military pensions. We failed that year. This year, Senator Collmore introduced the bill, and lo and behold, we cracked the door open. Congratulations, Brian. It was a small step, but it was a step. And in case anybody hasn't noticed, the Republicans are in an extreme minority. So one of the obstacles in front of us is to recognize who the people are in the building that we have to deal with. And sometimes you can't just walk in there and say sweepingly, I'm going to get rid of all taxes. It doesn't work in this kind of an environment. So you start where you can. I have been a supporter of virtually every tax incentive that Phil Scott has presented. I want to keep my fingers with his fingers in the dike of what you witnessed here tonight, a very large intent on our opponents in the Democratic primary to continue raising taxes to fund new programs. And we just cannot sustain that as much as we would like to have it. We've got to make choices between what is necessary and what is nice. Thank you.
Yeah, 10 seconds. And go ahead. Thank you. Senator, it's leadership. And personally, I think you lack it. It's leadership that can go in and talk to any side of the aisle and work together with them. Thank you.
Senator Benning?
Absolutely. Greg, you have chastised Phil Scott at every turn you possibly can, including supporting an effort in our own Republican Party to exclude both him and me from the party. When you talk about leadership, you don't lead by excluding people who you're supposed to be working with, as well as those who are opposing you on the other side of the aisle. You need to develop relationships. You heard David Zuckerman here this evening. There have been several times I have worked with him, and he'll be happy to tell you about which bills those are, but you probably have them down. The bottom line is I've spent 12 years now working across the aisle because we didn't have a choice. That's what leadership is.
Okay, we're going to move along. Another topic that we heard a good deal about in the first hour that I wanted to return to with each of you is housing. Like much of the nation, Vermont is facing a well-documented housing shortage. As Lieutenant Governor, what policies would you champion to address housing availability and affordability in Vermont? Mr. Thayer?
Thank you. Act 250, it's overburdens, it's very expensive, it takes too long to get through. The bill, I believe the governor just vetoed, part of an Act 250 bill would have created another 11-member board. I'm not sure what that would have done to the existing regional planning commissions or the regional environmental boards. But I just think Act 250 is really expensive for people to develop or to even renovate an existing property. And we hear horror stories up and down the state. As I toured and listened on my listening tour, and it's just people are very, very frustrated. And that drives a lot of other problems. And I'll agree with what the Democrats said earlier, I think it was Mrs. Zuckerman, and they're all related, and they all go in concert with one another. And we're on totally different ends of the spectrum, but I think we need to get government out of the way and let people, we need some regulation, of course, but we need to get government out of the way so we can open it up for development and investment in our communities. When I see a new business, I call them, tell them, thank you for your investment. It's important, and it's expensive. I've been there, I know it. Thank you.
Senator Bennett?
So last Sunday, I was here in Rutland, at the Rutland Airport, with a guy named Ryan Bliss, who is now the president of the Vermont Association of Aviators. And one of the complaints that he was issuing was they are trying to do things at airports to advance the cause of aviation as well as bring education for young people to those facilities. And that those facilities are all economic engines for every place that they are located. Ryan has a very big complaint about the obstacles that the state has placed in front of him. So to some extent, Greg and I are going to agree here. Act 250 has served the state well to some extent. The problem now is people cannot get appeals heard in time. They cannot get answers in time. They can probably meet most of the obligations that are involved with Act 250 and keep in line with what our economic and ecological services are all about. But they're frustrated because they can't get it done in time and it takes too long for them. They spend too much money to get there. I want to help. The bill that was vetoed by Phil Scott was actually initiated by Phil Scott, except that by the time it got to his desk, had too many poison pills in it and he couldn't accept it anymore. I want to avoid that. I want to try to keep a clean bill through that helps us get through the Act 250 process in a much fairer, much quicker manner.
Thank you. So we will now go to the lightning round to close out the night. Each of you will have a chance to answer these questions, but please do so in just a few words. If you had to complete the governor's term, would you retain their cabinet or appoint your own? Senator Benning.
I have actually worked with not just the Phil Scott administrative team, but also his election team. I have traveled around the state with them, and they are wonderful people. I have been on a daily basis working with every single person in his cabinet in some function or other. As chair of Senate institutions, my committee is responsible for all the state's brick and mortar, from the State House on down. I work with these people on a regular basis. I would retain every single one of them.
Mr. Thayer.
It would be a mix, but I would follow Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, and I would put the right people in the right chairs.
Okay, thank you both.
Thank you.
Again, as I told the Democratic candidates, just a few words. Do you
realize
believe...
I'm a lawyer and I get paid for it?
So for the next question, do you believe that statewide office holders in Vermont, including the lieutenant governor, should serve 2-year or 4-year terms? Mr. Thayer.
4.
Senator Benning.
4.
Okay. Many previous lieutenant governors have used this role as a springboard to higher office. Will you commit tonight that you will not seek higher office during your time as lieutenant governor? Senator Benning.
I have already told people very plainly, if I am elected to this position, I will commit myself to running a second term. As we come out of the COVID situation in the Senate, this is a critical time for institutional knowledge, and I love that institution and the people who work in it. I want to make sure they are comfortable moving forward before I decide to do anything else. Besides which, I'm 65, and by that time I'd be 69, and I don't know whether my body can handle this anymore.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Thayer.
No.
Do you support opening overdose prevention sites or safe injection sites in Vermont? Mr. Thayer.
No. I believe that it, real quick, 10 seconds. I believe that it just, what's the word I'm looking for? It just, helps bad behavior, if you will. So no.
Senator Benning.
We started to look at this in the Institutions Committee. There was one city in Canada, Vancouver, that actually had some success in this area. But with the combination of things like defund the police and get rid of qualified immunity, at a time when Burlington is now overrun, in my humble opinion, with criminal activity, this is not the time to even think about it.
Thank you. Do you support a Vermont constitutional amendment to protect reproductive rights, such as Proposal 5? Mr. Thayer.
No, I do not. We have abortion up until, minutes before birth. I believe that that Prop 5, Article 22 does not need to be enshrined in our Constitution. And I think the language is way too broad, and it talks about everybody, not just adults, but a child, what a child could do, and it's going to lead to a lot more stuff. And people like Joe Benning has kicked the can down the road, advocating his responsibility as a
Mr.
legislator.
Thayer. Sorry, no, Senator Benning.
Oh, I would have loved to hear the rest of that. Let me say,
No one speaks after you can join us.
as Greg will tell you, I have voted for Prop 5 twice, actually. And the reason that I did so, because of that core Republican value called individual liberty. The decision, in my eyes, belongs with the person who is simply asking to be left alone. That's my vision of government. And I recognize that there are people in my party who disagree with me. I have respect for them. But should they decide not to vote for me in the primary election, I would ask them to consider that if I survive the primary election, they think again after that and get into the general question of who's going to be better, a Republican or a Democrat in the lieutenant governor's role moving forward.
Thank you, Senator. Would you support legislation to require Vermonters to lock up their firearms when not in use? Senator Benning, will return to you.
Absolutely not. And I'm going to say that there's a very big difference between those folks who are living in Chittenden County and those of us from the wilds of the Northeast Kingdom. There is a very strong appreciation for guns in this state that remains, and I have fought with my good friend, Philip Baruch, on many occasions over this very issue.
Thank you. Mr. Thayer.
No, I would not. I believe we have enough gun regulations. We don't need any more. We need to enforce what we have. Thank you.
Thank you. And for our final question, since the lieutenant governorship is a part-time job, would you plan to hold another job during your time in office? And if so, what job? Mr. Thayer.
I haven't really thought about that. I'm a tax accountant, so I probably would. I probably would release everything that I was doing. My audit business, my accounting, my tax business, yes.
So you'd probably not hold a second job in your company?
Absolutely would not.
Senator Benning.
I don't believe this is a part-time job, nor should it be. There's a lot going on in this state that we are all proud of, and I would use every opportunity of every day to use that office as a full-time job, and it would be my excuse for finally getting rid of my law practice after 40 years.
And with that, we'll wrap it up. Thank you both. Let's have another round of applause for our participants.
I just want to make a special note and request of applause. I've been in the timekeeper's position before. It's not easy. So thank you very much for doing it.
Thank you, Senator Benning, Gregory Thayer. That concludes VTDigger's Lieutenant Governor debate. Please stay tuned to VTDigger.org to learn about upcoming events in our 2022 Digger Debate Series. I would like to thank all 6 candidates for joining us tonight, as well as the VTDigger staffers who made this possible, including Paul Heinz, Lola DeFort, Sarah Mearhoff, Natalie Williams, Kate Olney, Libby Johnson, Taylor Haynes, Libby Sparadeo, Leah Chen, Ella Bruson, Jenna Peterson. I'd also like to thank the sponsor of tonight's debate, the Vermont NEA, whose 13,000 members encourage all Vermonters to learn about the candidates and then go out and vote. Thanks as well to everyone here at the Paramount Theater and to our friends at PEGS TV. To support our coverage of Vermont government and politics, please visit vtdigger.org/donate. Thank you again, and good night.